Hidden Cases is finally coming to Escape from Tarkov for your stash, as well as we've had some interesting updates about hardcore mode from Nikita himself. So today we're going to be covering both the roadmap itself that BSG have released for the rest of 2024 and the Nikita interview that he did at TwitchCon, which unveiled some things that we've just never heard before from him. So let's start off with the roadmap first, because it is relatively scarce on details, I would say. So if we look at this here, so this goes for Arena and both the base game until the end of 2024. So really, that's only 3 more months. And there's a lot of stuff that they've got, intended here. If we start here with the Arena patch 2.2, we've got the new location. This is kind of that Sea Fortress prison thing that's been teased by Nikita in some of his posts on Twitter, along with a new game mode. Now, I don't know what this game mode actually might be, but if this is something like Gun Game, then that could be really, really good. Gun Game is one of my favorite modes on games like Counter-Strike, and so that could be awesome to have that in Arena. Technical improvements and gameplay adjustments, it's hard to know what that means, as well as quality of life. And we're getting a new HE grenade, a high explosive grenade. Exactly what that is, I'm not entirely sure, but that remains to be seen. So let's move on to patch 2.3, synchronization of EFT patch 0.15 and EFT Arena, because Arena typically is not in complete lockstep with the base game. We've still got things like, mounting on corners and stuff like that from patch 0.15 that is actually not in Arena yet. So Arena is usually a little bit behind in terms of those mechanics. And these days we have actually started to see Arena deviate from the base game a little bit. Things like the Vulcan helmet is now class 5 rather than class 6. In the base game, they've left it as class 6. But we are waiting for Arena to catch up on some of those other core mechanics. Then we finally get to our first base game update, 15.4, which is Unity 2022. We know this is on ETS at the moment. This is the early test server that some people who previously were allowed into this particular test are allowed to look at, as well as those who've purchased unheard, because that's one of the perks, is being as part of this early test server thing. As a reminder, there is a soft NDA. It's not really an NDA, but it's more of a, if you release information about what is being tested there, outside of obviously what Battlestate put themselves, then you can get kicked out of the program. So it's kind of a privilege for people who either have been let in previously or those who've bought the unheard edition. So we should look forward to Unity 2022 coming, and Nikita did talk a bit about that in the interview as well. This is mainly just tools. It won't have any impact on day one, but it'll allow them to do more stuff and do the things that they wanted to do and use some of the more fancy tech that is more up to date. Then we move on to another base game patch. This is 0.15.5. This has some amazing features inside it, potentially anyway. Stash hideout interaction whilst matching. Now, this has been asked for a very, very long time, and I was really singing the praises about this online, on Twitter in particular, and a couple of people pointed out to me that this wording here, while matching, might actually make all the difference about exactly how this feature is going to work, because there's certain things in Arena, for example, where you can look at presets and stuff like that while you are matching, but as soon as the loading starts, you can't look at that anymore. And I think that if they don't make this the entire process somehow while you're loading loot and all that other stuff, then that's going to be a real shame, because matching really doesn't take that long in my experience. At least matching is normally one of the shorter parts of the loading in process, and what often ends up taking a long time is, especially if you have a decent PC, is waiting for players, because people are loading up a match on their old magnetic drives, and it can take a really, really long time. So if you're only matching for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, this is actually really not going to move the needle if you're then waiting for another 6 minutes to get into a Streets of Tarkov raid, for example. So I really do implore the BSG team, if you're listening, please try to make this work for the entire matching and loading into raid process, everything up until the countdown, basically, because I think people are going to have a massive misinterpretation of what this is going to be if it's literally just the first 30 seconds, which, now that people have pointed it out to me, I'm actually a bit concerned that this is really going to be a nothing thing. What should be good, though, is the ability to lock items in the stash. That should be awesome. This is basically the case pinning facility that people have asked for ages. So the stash auto sort is really good at the start of the wipe, but once you get a couple of cases and things, the auto sort isn't actually that good at putting together large items that are sort of 4x4, 4x3, the size of a thick case, as a Brallo, a Scav junk box, that kind of thing. And it leaves lots of gaps in between. It's okay when all your items are 1x1 because it can just order them, just like that. But as you get more stuff, it becomes more difficult. So what people want is the ability to lock your items in place. So you put your thick cases and junk boxes or whatever at the bottom or the top of the stash, wherever you prefer, and then you can pin those. And so when the auto sort happens, it happens around those items. So those items aren't moved, and then it will just, sort everything else around those. Now, if it was up to me, I would also really like the ability to do an auto sort from bottom up as well as from top down. So right now it's top down. The issue is with a top down is that when you control click items out of your character into your stash, they automatically go into the top. So if you auto sort everything into the top, then the top of the stash is just always a mess. And when you're control clicking stuff out, it just adds to the mess. Whereas if you could auto sort things to the bottom of your stash, then when you come out of raid, you could then just control click stuff into the top of the stash and it'd be much neater. I would love an auto sort that sorted from bottom up rather than top down. So again, BSG team, if you're listening, then please, I would really, really love that. That would be so, so good and hopefully wouldn't be too hard to do. So next we have expansions to new mechanics added in 0.15.0.0. So this is bipods, mounting, smooth zooming, that kind of thing. I don't know exactly what they're going to add here. Hard for me to tell at this point, but maybe they'll just be making some improvements to it. In terms of mounting and bipods, I in particular would quite like the range of verticality to be increased when prone, because sometimes it can be very hard to shoot up hills or shoot down hills. The whole thing is just really awkward when you're lying down. You hardly have any space. There's like no angle when you're looking vertically. Horizontally, I get that. That's like based upon how you set up, and that's part of the way it's balanced. But vertically, sometimes it can be just really awkward to get into a position where you can actually shoot the thing that is like right in front of you, but it's like slightly down a hill, and you can't move your gun down any further because you're on some particular piece of rock that's got an angle on it that means that you can't actually use it. It's like very, very awkward. And then we have the classic technical improvements, sand engine improvements, and we're going to get this fall, autumn, weather season, whatever you like to call it. We've got AI behavior adjustments, game client performance optimization. Specifically, it doesn't say like FPS increase, which I'm always, these days, we're going to just have to wait and see if we do actually ever get this. Weapon content and in-game events. Now, I don't know what weapon content exactly means, but the fact that it says expansions to new mechanics here as well, my guess is that this might include the bipods on more weapons. There's a ton of weapons right now that can't take bipods, and it seems to be more for like a technical reason that bipods can't go on rails that are also allowed on the sides of handguards. At the moment, they're exclusively allowed on rails that can go on the bottom of handguards, or handguards that actually also have like a rail that would mount a bipod directly. And I think the reason for this is because they may not have a system right now to differentiate between whether the rail is on the bottom or on the side, or maybe they didn't have time to put it in before to prevent you from putting a bipod on the side of the gun. I mean, it'd be kind of funny. Maybe they should just let you do that, but I guess it would break the mechanics, because if you deployed it, how would it deploy it? There's probably loads of bugs with it. So my personal opinion is that's the reason why you actually can't put it on these rails right now, because they don't have this determination of whether it's on the side or not. So maybe this is tied to this, and so we could get more weapons with bipods on, as it kind of would be in real life. And some in-game events, because at this point, I suppose with going into the end of the season, we'll start be looking towards the wipe in general, and so it'll be more towards the end game. Right, moving on to patch 2.4. This is the next arena patch. We've got some more quality of life, whatever that entails. The ranked calibration system, so you don't just have to start from 1500 MMR, you can actually calibrate your rank to start with. Lots of other games have this. The one I'm most familiar with is Dota 2. So you play a bunch of placement matches, and then based on how you perform, it then gives you an MMR at least to start with, so that you're in a decent ballpark. So this normally helps with people who are better at the game, like if you're a better player, because it could put you at 2000, 2500, 3000 to start with. You don't have to grind up through all the ARP from 1500, because going up like 500 MMR or ELO or whatever you want to call it, ARP in arena, it takes a really, really long time, especially when you're one person on a team of 5, and you're on a team of 5 people who are probably averaging around that rank that you're playing at. Even if you're a really good player, it can actually take quite a long time to just like bring yourself out of that. Some more technical improvements, whatever that entails, and the Molotov cocktail. We've seen Nikita tease this before, so that should be kind of fun. I actually quite like that in the base game, just for aerial denial, because honestly that's how most people use grenades. To be honest, people hardly ever get grenade kills, and this would actually be really, really mean with the tripwire. Anyway, let's move on to patch 2.5, another arena one, Battle Pass. Now this is one that is it controversial? I'm not really sure. I mean, I know Nikita said that they were limiting the amount of microtransactions and stuff like that they were doing, but he was probably talking about the base game. I think that's why some people maybe think this is a bit controversial, because it's a kind of a monetization strategy or whatever from arena, which you already have to pay for. But I don't think there's really anything wrong with this. Depends what it comes with. We're just gonna have to see, but that's fine. If you don't have to buy it, it's just extra stuff to do in the game. There's probably extra quests or things to unlock various whatever. So that's usually how battle passes work. I'm not a huge fan of battle passes just in general, but I know people really love them, so we'll see. Let's just, jury's out on that one. Got to wait and see how it's implemented. A ranked season system, so you're gonna have like a season where people rank up, and then somebody wins on the leaderboard, and then it gets reset, and then people start again. More quality of life improvements, and another new location. Now I don't believe we know anything about this one yet, so we'll just have to see for teasers and that kind of thing, but expect this to sort of start coming out maybe towards the end of the year, November, that kind of time, when they might show some bits and pieces. I'm going to be watching out for Nikita's Twitter just to see what this entails. Finally, we have patch 16, Escape from Tarkov patch. This seems like a wipe patch to me, but I don't really know. It doesn't actually say. In the past, they've always said wipe on here, or at least on the previous roadmap, they said wipe, like, summer wipe, winter wipe, whatever. But I didn't actually say wipe on this. But it does seem like it because, it's a whole number different. We went from patch 14 to patch 15 to patch 16. So, you can imagine it probably is. And this one's going to have new high-end content, whether this is just quests or something, not really sure. And quality of life and technical improvements as usual with some new weapons, but we've had no information on what this is going to be yet. Sound engine improvements, which they really should continue with. And game client performance optimization again. Expansions to the interactive location mechanics, which would be really nice. We'd like to see a few more of those, like, button presses and stuff that you can actually do on the map to make things change. And the winter weather season. So that's really it for the roadmap. It's quite bare bones, as it usually is with BSG. Normally we get more information on like a Tarkov TV or Nikita interviews and that kind of thing. And I wasn't going to make a video just about the roadmap itself until Nikita did an interview at TwitchCon talking about a bunch of stuff. So we're going to talk about that next because there's a lot more information in that, which kind of like gives flavor to the roadmap and also just for the general development of the game. So basically what I'm going to do here is just summarize the questions and the answers that Nikita gave. The actual full interview is 40 minutes long. So if you do want to go and see it, you can go to the Battlestate Games Twitch page, look at their most recent videos. It's near the end, kind of in the 5-hour, 6-hour region. You'll find it because it's quite a long interview. Quick post-edit note from me. I'm actually going to upload that video as an unlisted video. So in the description of this particular video and also in the pinned comment, you'll be able to find a link to the actual raw VOD if you want to. The full 40-minute one, it's going to be unlisted, so you won't be able to see it unless you go through that link. But obviously there's a lot of chat in that and stuff, so we're going to summarize it here because there's some tasty things in there that I think you'd be interested in. So the first question, are you happy with the current state of the game's economy and the player progression, and will we ever see more hardcoreness coming to the game, basically? And he said that like this wipe is not what it's supposed to be in terms of progression because they added arena, marathon quests that give you a lot of XP, so the pace was increased for sure, and basically it's not really how it's meant to be in Escape from Tarkov style. So for next wipe, he said that there will be some changes that will probably slow down the progress for sure, because right now let's take this wipe as a test. He did say that there are some people who do like the game this way, and typically a lot of those people are those who can't play 6 to 8 hours, so they obviously quite like the fact that you can progress quite quickly and get through and get loads of XP and get to max level like relatively easily. But he said that each time that there's a different wipe, they balance the game in a different way, so it's quite nice to have each wipe be different. Like this one's a really fast progression, whereas the next wipe might be much slower, and it kind of changes each time. It's not like every wipe is the same, which I actually do quite like. Next, he was asked, what is the future direction of the game? So like MMO style or closer to the raid-based shooter that we have today? And Nikita basically said that it's going to be raid style. It's still going to be the way that it is now. He said the whole principle of raids, it'll be like this because the MMO aspect is still there, but gameplay wise, we're kind of settled in. And he said, I think the core gameplay is ready and we won't change something drastically. So yeah, this is it. And this is something that a lot of people have been talking about for a while, which is that the 1.0 version of Tarkov probably is going to look quite similar to the way it does today. Obviously, there's more systems. We've got Marathon and this location transfer and stuff like that. But the way that the raids play out and stuff like this, a lot of this is just locked down now. We're really not going to get that many massive changes. Like it's not suddenly going to become open world in the next year or something. So, we do kind of have to start accepting that a lot of the way that the game plays out right now is it. And it's going to be tweaks around, these core features as opposed to something drastic. Of course, as usual, he said that the team is working on the storyline quests. He's basically said that in every interview in Tarkov TV for the past 2 years, because that's the bulk of like the Endgame and how the game actually kind of gets stitched together. Next, he was asked about the Flea Market, and that there was a poll on Twitter to remove the Flea Market on next wipe, which actually is this wipe now, and 47% said yes and 45% said no. Will we ever see a wipe without the flea, and what are the general plans for it? So Nikita said, look, the percentages on that, you can't just like take the fact that, oh, it was 2% more, so we're going to remove the flea or whatever, because he said, rightly so, that it would leave a lot of people unhappy if they've just removed the Flea Market for a wipe. He personally really likes the idea of hardcore, and he said that removal of the Flea Market will be an option, very likely, for a hardcore mode. And this is going to be rolled into the prestige system in general that he's talked about a couple of times, because when you prestige, so you beat the game and then you prestige, you'll be able to like roll a new character basically and pick some perks and some drawbacks before you start the next game. And one of these drawbacks will likely be the removal of the Flea Market. So it could then be a test for some people to do this, rather than it being just self-imposed like it is now, to have it actually like baked into the game mechanics, which is really nice. Outside of that, as he said, he doesn't think that removing the Flea Market is actually possible, but, he does love the idea that every wipe is different, so who knows in the future. But I think it's just, it goes against what so many people expect out of the game these days. It just doesn't really work. Even with that said, though, Nikita actually doesn't really like the flea market and does believe that now it goes against the principles of the game after seeing how it ended up actually working out. You know, he basically said it's not good for progression, but it is what it is. It's a different style of gameplay because you can, you know, get so much faster progression just by buying stuff off the flea market and whatever. And it's difficult to balance, and it just makes the whole game a bit tricky. But they've kind of gone so far down that route now, and the game is kind of how it is, that it's very, very difficult to remove. So next he was asked, what are the plans for the team after Tarkov? Will you resume development on Russia 2028, or are you working on something different? So he obviously said that Tarkov is not going to end with the release of the game. There's DLCs and all that other stuff first, but they're actually working on a new game. He didn't say exactly what that game was, but he did say that they had started the pre-production phase on this. Obviously, EFT must be released and must be polished, and they've got other stuff going on. But again, he did actually mention that, you know, the release is kind of locked in. We're not actually adding anything right now. It's ready to be done and be released, and then after that, we will have the DLCs, and the game will be live for at least one more decade or something like that. That was in his words. He thinks that EFT is going to be alive for at least 10 years after release. I mean, obviously, the community is really going to be the determining factor of that, rather than, you know, Nikita and the Battle State team. But they intend to be supporting it and doing stuff on it for 10 years. So yeah, interesting that they're starting this other game. Like maybe it is Russia 2028, or maybe they've decided on something else. Honestly, I mean, Tarkov 2 would actually probably hit pretty hard after they've released the game, and, you know, they wait a couple of years and then release something else whilst fixing the spaghetti. Honestly, wouldn't probably be a bad idea, but like who knows? That's pure speculation at this point. So next he was asked again, basically like what happens when the game gets released as a final game with endgame content. Like, how's the endgame content gonna look? Is there something to spend millions of rubles on that's like a unique item that persists through wipes? There's gonna be hideout decorations, all of this kind of stuff. And he said, look, there's gonna be a prestige system, you know, that allows you to play the game on repeat and earn unique things as you go through, and there's prestige points as you know, go through a couple of times and that kind of stuff. You're able to restart. But he said that the endgame content is all going to be in relation to the storyline quests, and to complete the storyline, you're going to need to complete almost every aspect of the game. You'll need to spend a lot of money within the game, complete a lot of quests. So the main driver to experience the endgame content will be the completion of the storyline quest, and we can't say much more about it because we're going to find out about it on 1.0, and nobody is testing it early, not even on ETS or anything like that. There was a quick question about operational tasks, basically saying that they might try to streamline them a bit more because sometimes they don't really make sense, which is very welcome. And then he was asked about the loot economy. What is the ideal loot economy meant to be? Do we want resources to be scarce and more hardcore? Or do we want players to hunt expensive items to fund lesser valued items through the flea market and the traders? And he himself said, look, this is a good question because he was always a fan of the hardcore type of game. The initial concept of the game was about the struggle. So ammo and everything, like medical items, they were very, very scarce. And that was some of the initial feedback, that it was too rare to find even just basic stuff. But that was kind of his idea, that, you know, they only found like 10 rounds, 5 rounds of one particular type, or like one single grenade in a whole week. And he was always a fan of that, with having it like super hardcore. But, you know, he basically said that, like, due to the expansion of the game, a lot of people got excited about it, and they had a lot of people from, you know, mainstream games as well, and it was too hard for people. And so to widen out the appeal of the game without sacrificing too much, they basically changed it from hardcore to midcore. And this is in Nikita's words himself. He's now referred to how Tarkov is today as like midcore, to, you know, branch out and broaden the audience and the demographic of people who could actually come and play the game. But, you know, the game is still difficult, and it's not necessarily like fun per se, but it's about the challenge and pushing through. And again, in his words, EFT is basically just a pain in the ass, but that's okay because you receive good emotions when you finally get through the raid. But if it's too hard, then there's only a very, very small number of people that can actually go and play it. And obviously he has to think like a businessman too, right? Which is one of the reasons why EFT has ended up becoming so successful, and he's probably succeeded in that goal, I would say. The next question was, do you believe that Arena could become a free-to-play game at some point in the future? And he basically said no, they're going to carry on doing free weekends for that because it's, you know, a big part of Escape from Tarkov, so they're not just going to make it free. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think maybe at some point in the far future, then that could be a thing, but it doesn't sound like they've got any plans to do that anytime soon. In terms of balancing and developing quality of life features versus content, he basically said that the teams are different for these things. So the content teams are different from those doing, you know, balancing and quality of life and stuff. So they kind of just work on everything as fast as they can. Not really too much of an in-depth answer, but obviously they pick and choose the things that they put in based on, you know, how much the community needs them versus how important it is for getting the game finished, etc., etc. So nothing that we don't really know on that one. Now, one interesting one here was that apparently said a lot of people were interested that there might have been discussions about TarCon. This was mentioned previously, so like an actual Tarkov convention for Tarkov players. And the follow-up question on this was about EFT LANs and whether there's going to be more of those, you know, LAN type tournaments like there was in Hanover that one time. And he basically said, yeah, we have plans for TarCon. It's kind of frozen at the moment because there's a lot of events, but there's a lot of people who are interested in the game, so 100% they want to carry on working on that at some point and actually to bring it to fruition. So maybe we'll see that in the future, and depending on the community and how active people are with the tournaments and whatnot, then they'll think about doing another LAN. It didn't sound like they had any plans to do on right away, but that if the community was interested and there was demand there for it, then they would definitely look at it. There was a short question about betting on Arena, whether you can do betting on Arena. Nikita basically said, look, maybe in game you might be able to do it, but it doesn't sound like that's planned at all. And then with the release of PvE from a standalone project, what does that actually do to the resourcing in the team? And Nikita basically said that, only a small portion of the team is working on PvE, which is like as you would expect, to be honest with you. And the only time that they used some more resource was when they were actually making the standalone offline progression work. Because we remember back when they had everything running on the servers, he did say that that was quite a big piece of dev work to enable that to actually function, because you have to recode a lot of stuff that's like very core within the game. So after that's been done, the team that's actually looking after PvE now is is very small. There's only a few people doing it. Despite that, they still have a lot of plans for PvE with addition of different features, and that's basically because of its popularity. It took you by surprise how popular it was, and they're going to carry on adding PvE subsystems. The follow-up question on this was very much related, talks about mod support, which is supposed to be coming. He basically said that he likes the idea. They will have a pipeline and a process for adding these things so that they're 100% sponsored by the game when they get put in, but this is going to come after the release of the game. So this is something post 1.0. That really does make the timing, we don't really know when that's going to come, but he's still very positive about that and would like it to be there. The next question was about having more armor that includes throat protection. He basically said that he was going to look at it because he's seen that the neck hitbox is bothering the community right now, and when those things do crop up and lots of people are talking about it, they do listen and try to balance the game around that kind of stuff. So it's either maybe a simplification of the hitboxes or something along those lines to make it either less likely or whatever. So they are looking at it and they're taking it into consideration and making some changes. There were some questions about ETS and Unity 2022. The first one, is ETS going to be used a bit more? And he said basically yes. And then with Unity 2022, basically the long and the short of it was that we shouldn't expect to see too much difference between the game before it and the game after it, because it gives them tools to be able to enact various things rather than changing something up front in the actual game itself. So he said, yeah, it's not going to be noticeable at first. It's just a change of the tools and the game engine. It's just a new version, but it allows us to implement some technical stuff that should give performance, networking performance, and so on. So an interesting one was asked about the roadmap, where basically the technical and quality of life improvements were just one-liners. There's not really much information. And Nikita pretty much said that the roadmap itself isn't really indicative of the bulk of the work going on right now, because a lot of the team is working on preparation for a release. So it's the quests for the storyline, the main storyline, endgame stuff, the endgame content, and that kind of thing. So we can't really go on the roadmap because they can't tell us what those things are. Now, I do personally wish that they'd put a bit more detail into what the quality of life adjustments actually are, but we'll see them when the patches come, so I'm not really that fussed. But yeah, a lot of the work is going into the release of the game at this point. The final question from the community was about the audio this wipe and how they had actually rechanged the system. And basically what they did was they took a load of actual headsets in real life and recorded various audio sounds and aligned it more closely to that. My personal opinion is that the audio does actually sound pretty good this wipe, but they just need to iron out some of the bugs that make it inconsistent. But if they can make it work, then it's going to be the best audio that Tarkov has had. They just need to fix some of this missing audio or directionality or whatever. The actual sound of the sound is really, really nice these days. So as long as it's consistent and not buggy, then it should be really quite good. So that's it really. As I said, I wasn't going to do a roadmap update originally, but because it came with the interview, I figured that there's a lot of people who just wouldn't go out and see it, so it would be good to do a summary. So as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.